So Path of Exile 2 just dropped their newest class called the Huntress, which specializes in a combination of ranged and melee damage using a brand new weapon type, the Spear. So how is the new class performing? Well, it actually is pretty good. It feels fresh and powerful, and I've been enjoying the class quite a bit. So I decided to put together this quick starter build to help you understand the best abilities and combos right out of the gate. In this video, we'll go over my favorite Huntress skills, plus what skill gems I'm using to make them even more powerful, how to find the best spear, the best passive tree nodes for your Huntress build, and much more. So let's dive right into it. We'll start as usual with skills, and the Huntress has a lot to offer here. Even at the very start of the campaign, you're initially going to start with your Spear, which unlocks two basic attacks. There's the melee-based Spear Stab, and then the ranged attack called Spear Throw. Now, early on, I tended to rely more on the Spear Throw for its obvious ranged advantage. This can help you, take out enemies quickly from afar before they actually have a chance to hit you back and deal any damage. But for melee attacks, and especially for some AoE at the start, you're going to use Whirling Slash. That's the first skill gem that you pick up. We're going to lean heavily into this on the build later on with the right support gems. For now, though, it's just great for when enemies get bunched together, as it sets a storm around you, which slows them and blinds them, as well as dealing AoE damage. Now, you can stack the storm up and build it even larger, and as soon as you leave the storm by, let's say, dodging away, for example, you'll create an explosion to deal even more damage, and that's based on how many spins that you did. So again, it's a pretty great tool for dealing with crowds in the early game. Now, while I didn't use this skill too much at the very start of the campaign, I did start significantly using it more in Act 2 and beyond, in combination with Herald of the Blood, as we're going to see later on. But what makes this work is you can apply a specific support gem to Slash, and that's called Lacerate. This gives you a chance to apply bleed to targets whenever you do that AoE slash. Now, Herald of Blood, which we'll talk about later, then blows up targets which have the bleed effect, so you can get some nice synergy on the Huntress build for clearing, especially when you consider that the skill already blinds targets by default, and then we have passive tree nodes, which boost our damage against blind targets. But you'll get your second skill gem after talking to Renly and Clearfell, and you should use this to unlock Explosive Spear for another ranged damage option. This combines nicely with Spear Throw at the start of the game, as you can toss the exploding spear first and then pepper enemies from afar with that thrown spear ability until the exploding spear detonates. But you'll notice that the 2.5 second detonation time here does feel quite long, especially against faster moving enemies. That's why Explosive Spear should be the first skill that you upgrade with support gems. Now, another nice combo you should practice early on is launching Explosive Spear and then closing the gap into a group of enemies using Whirling Slash to blind them and deal AoE damage. This should keep those enemies busy enough to hold them in place, giving you enough time for the explosion to land. Plus, you won't be taking much damage at all due to enemies' reduced hit chance while blinded. But Explosive Spear does get insanely good, as I said, with the right support gems. The first one you'll want to get is called Expedite, which provides 40% less detonation time, reducing your explosion timer down from its initial 2.5 seconds. This makes a huge difference because now you don't have to wait nearly as long for these explosions to detonate. And combined with this, you can also use the Overabundance support gem, which increases your active spear limit from 1 up to 2. So now you can throw out 2 explosive spears to essentially double your damage output, which is a great option. But another skill that feels really good on the Huntress class is called Spearfield. And this is not so much for damage as it is for utility. This skill basically has 0 DPS potential, but with the right gems, it becomes an insanely powerful crowd control option. What I did here was apply the pin support gem right away to remove any stun potential and have the skill immobilize targets instead. This makes sense because Spearfield has a huge area to begin with, so it's easy to find targets and then immobilize them in place. After that, you can then add in the Lockdown support gem for even more pin buildup against enemies based on their distance to you. So closer enemies are going to get even more pin buildup, essentially guaranteeing them to get immobilized in just one hit. So what I really loved about this skill is how you can use it strategically during the campaign, casting it in hallways or in narrow passages to basically stop everything in their tracks before they get to you and letting you fire off those explosive spears without taking any damage, having complete control of the battlefield. Now, I don't use it all the time because it does slow things down, slows down the tempo a little bit, But in areas which are too chaotic, or especially if you're feeling underleveled on the Huntress class, then this skill is pretty much a game changer and it's a lot of fun to use. Now, another solid DPS skill that you want to check out is called Rake. And this one is entirely focused on bleed damage. Much like Whirling Slash with Lacerate, we can also use Rake to start building up that bleed effect on enemies, and this will become even more useful against packs of enemies once we unlock Herald of Blood. But I did like using Rake specifically versus bosses early on, as it also gives a nice bit of mobility, letting you quickly jump in from range to inflict that bleed, and then you can immediately roll dodge back out to apply more of those explosive spears, and then simply rinse and repeat. Now, this helps support the hybrid range/melee fighting style of the Huntress, where you actually have passives that boost your damage for doing this type of combat style. Basically, casting a range skill boosts your melee damage, and then using a melee skill also boosts your range damage. We'll go over the passive tree in just a bit, but you should be getting used to this playstyle on the Huntress class because that's specifically what it's designed for. Now, in terms of support gems here, basically anything that provides damage support here is fine, such as the previously mentioned Brutality, or you could boost it with different types of elemental damage. But once you pick up Herald of Blood, this bleed-focused Huntress really starts to feel complete. Now you get this as early as Act 1 by defeating the King of the Mists, crushing his skull to obtain your first Spirit Gem, and then use that to unlock the Herald of Blood skill. This works much like other Herald abilities in Path of Exile if you've played the game before, but this one requires that your target have the blood loss effect before it can deal damage, which simply means that your target must have taken some bleed damage already, which is no problem at all if you've been using either Rake or the Whirling Slash skill with Lacerate applied. Either way, you'll now get some juicy blood explosions for bonus damage, which combined with your explosive spears and AoE damage from Slash is an insane combination. So your basic clear combo on this build, it now feels complete. It feels really good. And in terms of support gems here, I would just start with something basic like Magnified Effect, for example, to make those explosions even bigger. All right, so those are the basic skills. Then how do you put everything together? Well, for packs of enemies, like I said, don't forget that you always have Spearfield as an option. If you want to slow things down or be more methodical, that can actually be placed before enemies come into range, or basically as they are rushing towards you to stop them dead in their tracks. You don't have to use that though for easier enemies, or if I'm just pushing through and trying to clear faster, then I'm going to just start with Explosive Spear. I'm going to place 2 of those at my enemy's feet. Then I will dash into melee range either with Whirling Slash or with Rake to start dealing that melee damage. Rake tends to be good for single targets or smaller groups. Bosses, obviously, while Whirling Slash is going to be better against larger groups because you can spam it multiple times to increase your AoE damage. That skill specifically max out at 3 casts, giving you a larger size storm, which then you can dodge roll out of for it to explode for even more bonus damage. So you've got Explosion from Spears, you've got Explosion from your Whirling Slash Tornado, and if anything happens to survive that, or if more enemies are rushing in, they often will be exploded by your Blood Herald skill, which has a slight delayed pop as you start to finish off enemies. So basically you have like 3 to 4 different types of explosions all happening pop, 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 pop in sequence, and it just works really, really well. Now for bosses at this point, you can do something kind of similar, firing off your 2 explosive spears, obviously, dashing into melee either with Slash or again using Rake if you really want to focus on bleed damage. Just keep moving though, do a slash or 2, then dodge back, get some distance, fire off those explosive spears again, that's your ranged attack, and then back into melee range for a few more slashes and simply rinse and repeat from there. Overall, it's a really fun and active playstyle, and it's really easy to do a lot of damage while also staying mobile and avoiding boss damage at the same time. All right, so let's talk about the starting gear on the Huntress next, what type of items and equipment you should be picking up. Now, obviously, we're going to start with the spear, which is going to be your primary weapon. It is a one-handed weapon, something to keep in mind, so you'll be a little bit limited on the runes that you can place here. But damage for spears is actually pretty good. Now, you'll want to focus, obviously, on physical damage. Any spear that you can pick up that either adds physical damage or does a % increase boost to physical damage, that's going to be your best option moving forward. That's going to scale the damage up of all of your Huntress abilities. This one I did like because it also has strength and dexterity, so plenty of room for extra support gems. So yeah, if you don't have that, I would just recommend spending some gold to gamble on spears until you get something similar for the early game, because that's going to make the biggest difference on your build in terms of your DPS. Now, the other thing about the Huntress is Path of Exile 2 introduced the buckler as an offhand weapon. These are pretty cool. It does allow you to parry, which I don't think parry is quite as good as people thought it would be. Not all enemies, and specifically bosses, even do melee attacks that can be parried, so it's kind of niche. You won't always be parrying. Yeah, so in this case, it's kind of just a stat stick. It just gives you some good evasion, so look for, a buckler with some good evasion and other stats that you need. So, maximum life. This one has dexterity, has some good resistances. So yeah, buckler, obviously not as important as the spear, but you do want to keep an eye out for good ones that are going to increase your overall stats. Other important pieces, we always talk about boots in Path of Exile 2. You want movement speed. You want as much as possible, at least 10 to 15% to start with, and then you can always improve that. Gloves are something that I always look for as well in the early game. Keep in mind that you can get a lot of stats back with the gain life per enemy killed and the gain mana per enemy killed. So if you can find a pair of gloves that have both of those, that's actually really good, and it helps you use more of your abilities more consistently, and you don't have to worry about using potions as much either. But that's really it. Still very early game for this build. I'll go ahead and mouse over some of the other items that I've picked up. Nothing really special, though I will talk about uniques here in just a second. Again, nothing incredible, very early game still, but I did come across a unique here, which is kind of cool. It works out really well. This is the Hermit's Garb, and you can see this has specific bonuses to bleeding. Not only is it going to reduce bleeding duration on you, which is not such a big deal, but it also makes your bleeding aggravated. So bleeding that's been aggravated always treats the target as moving, causing it to deal 100% extra damage. So if you're really going for the full-on bleed Huntress build, something like the Hermit's Garb, which is going to maintain that aggravated debuff in addition to bleeding, it's a pretty nice way to do that. Again, definitely not required. The build works fine completely without that, but it is kind of something cool you can look out for as you're picking up those uniques. Okay, let's switch over to the passive tree next for the Huntress. Starting build, very early still. Now, if you're familiar with the Ranger, you'll be familiar with a lot of these passive nodes, but there are some things that work really well on the Huntress, which I'm going to highlight for you. But starting out, very basic, we're just going to pick up damage nodes. So 10% increased attack damage going through, very nice. All the way up until we reach Primal Instinct. That's going to give attack, speed, area of effect, plus some additional dexterity. That's awesome. Going to keep working up with melee. Keep working through melee and projectile damage. That's something we're going to see a lot on the Huntress. Stalk and leap. This is what I talked about earlier. So when you deal projectile attack damage, you're going to boost your melee damage, and then vice versa. Dealing melee damage increases your projectile damage within an 8-second window. So when you do combat on the Huntress, you want to be jumping back and forth, do some ranged attacks, do those explosive spears, jump into melee range, do some slashes, use your Rake skill, and then rinse and repeat. That keeps these buffs active for maximum damage. Now, once you get to the end of this tree, there's kind of two ways you can go. You can go for more just basic damage over here, but I do want to point out these nodes going up, which are damage versus blinded. So if you like the Whirling Slash skill, that does blind by default. It's a 4-second debuff, and you're recasting the slash, obviously, to build up stacks of the tornado. So your enemies are blinded all the time. And with this, you can have 15%, 15%, and an additional 25. So about 55% total damage against blinded targets. This works against bosses as well. So yeah, that's something kind of unique and interesting about the Huntress, is your ability to very easily blind targets. You have other skills that do this too. And then you do have these passive nodes, which can give you that bonus damage. So just keep that in mind. But then we're just picking up more damage going down here. Again, projectile damage if melee hits are done. Adaptable Assault is pretty interesting. It gives you additional melee strike range. So, basically hitting an enemy with those thrown spears. That means you can gap close into melee range from a further distance. So you're going to use that with your Rake ability with Whirling Slash. That's a really good one. And then again, that's just the opposite, more melee damage if you deal projectile damage. Where I'll be going next is sort of in this direction. So we have these 3 nodes we can pick up for more attack damage. From there, you can just head down, pick up more damage nodes, projectile damage over here. You can get a lot of damage from this tree. If you continue down, you can specialize more into bleed builds here. Perfectly placed knife is an interesting one. And then just so you can see kind of where we're going towards the spear tree at the end, here's what that looks like. So you get things like increased critical damage bonus with spears, increased critical hit chance with spears, increased damage, obviously. Focus thrust is really interesting. That increases your melee damage by a massive 75% when you're surrounded, but also increases projectile damage when there's no enemies within 3 meters. So that's really cool. And then you have increased damage and accuracy. So yeah, this is where we'll be working towards next. But hopefully all that helps you getting started on the Huntress class in POE2. Like I said, I've been having a blast playing it so far this week. Very well-designed class. I think it's great for beginners. There's a lot of interesting synergies for more experienced players to check out as well. So it's been a lot of fun. So if you found this video helpful, do me a favor, crush that like button so that YouTube knows to share this with others. Link will be down below for the written guide in case you want more information on gear, skills, and passives. And if you've been playing the Huntress yourself, let me know what you think down in the comments section below. But as always, I hope you're doing well. Stay safe out there, and I will see you around in the next video.